Alan comes in areas, and every year,
I feel like you can't call it an NRL Magic round without magicians.
How would that translate in the hard-hitting world of rugby league?
I think they'd be good with the sleight of hand, the
Yep.
deft passes.
Maybe the dummy?
Yeah, but when it comes to putting their body on the line, I think they'd probably get really seriously injured. We need to do something about the amount of time it takes a sin-bin player to exit the field. What about any player getting sin-bin for the Titans? We say if you get off in the next 10 seconds...
We'll sign you up to another team.
Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of The Voluntary Tackle, the only NRL podcast still counting the costs of an expensive sleeve sponsorship deal with Cody Walker for State of Origin. Not the best 100k I've ever spent, but we have received a boost in listenership from people who build stadium tunnels, so yin and yang. So today on the show we'll be dissecting all the big issues in rugby league with the precision of a Jack Whiten flick pass. Plus, we'll have a couple more interviews later in the show, one with the original Wolfman of rugby league, that's right, former referee Greg McCallum, as well as a chat with one of South Sydney's favourite sons. But first, we have some breaking news. The Voluntary Tackle has just received word that former New South Wales 5'8 Cody Walker is still missing. For more on this developing story, we're actually going to cross live to our roving reporter on the ground in London, Alan Steve. Alan, is there any more you can tell us?
Thank you, Eamon. Well, the police here are remaining very tight-lipped about the details, but I can tell you this. The New South Wales team officials have been trying to find Cody since the third minute of State of Origin on Wednesday night when he first was reported missing and are now obviously very concerned for his welfare.
It was obviously very unusual, Alan, for a player to disappear mid-match. Do the police have any leads? And also, why the fuck are you in London?
No concrete leads, Eamon, as yet. There was a potential sighting made to New Scotland Yard earlier today, but it turns out it was just another person absolutely shitting it on the tube. He's been released without charge after questioning. As for why I'm in London, Eamon, well, I have it on good authority that Cody is more likely to turn up in a location as far away from Queensland as possible. So I've jumped on a plane to the Northern Hemisphere in the hope of cracking the case.
I see. Well, I guess that all makes sense. What should the public do if they spot Cody Walker?
Well, Eamon, the police have told me not to approach him, not because he's dangerous or anything, he's far from that obviously, but because he might freak out a bit, especially, they've told me, if you're wearing maroon-coloured clothing.
Well, thanks for the update there, Alan, and of course, stay safe.
Thanks, Eamon.
Well, just as the Blues saw off the greatest Queensland team to don a jersey since the infamous Wally Lewis cloning controversy of 1986, a new crop of equally rabid Maroons players have hoed into view. Game 1 hung in the balance on Wednesday. That was until a misguided Jack Whiten flick pass killed New South Wales' chances faster than a poisonous Krispy Kreme donut would claim the life of Clive Palmer. And while the state of New South Wales collectively abuses Jack for throwing the pass and the state of Queensland finishes off a bronze statue immortalising the moment, some have called for restraint. This has especially been the case for those calling for Whiten to have his left arm forcibly amputated. Now, for my 2 cents, I'm simply not convinced that taking a Saudi Arabian approach to rugby league training is the best way forward for the Blues. I also think New South Wales are best served by sticking with its policy of exiling players we no longer want. You know, a bit like that time we ordered a restraining order against Mitchell Pearce and permanently banished him to Raymond Terrace. But look, Game 1 of Origin obviously wasn't all Jack's fault. It's a team game after all, and it's never the fault of just one person. It was also Latrell Mitchell's fault. But look, I could sit here and go through the ins and outs of why the Blues lost, but let's face it, there's already been plenty of analysis of the match done already by other NRL shows, so in its continual quest to be a little bit different, a little bit weird, just that touch more inaccurate, the Voluntary Tackle will present its postmortem of the New South Wales Blues performance through the guise of television. So here is our take on each individual who played last Wednesday.
I bet we've been together for 1,000,000 years.
Thank you
James Tedesco. Seinfeld. Amazing to watch each and every time. Josh Adokar. Modern Family. Still a pretty good standard, but not as good as the early stuff. Josh Morris. The Hey Hey It's Saturday reboot. Pretty good to see for nostalgia's sake, but you just know it's not going to be around for very long. Latrell Mitchell. The Seinfeld finale. Expected something amazing, but all you got was an absolute abomination. Cody Walker. Scrubs. Heard a lot of great things about it, but still yet to see it. Nathan Cleary. Game of Thrones. So much hype about it, so it can never really live up to the expectations. David Klemmer. SBS World News. Just really confronting and tough to watch, but so important it's there. Damien Cook. Breaking Bad. An amazing watch that you just have to binge, but it just goes by so fast. Paul Vaughan. Q&A. Not always a joy to watch, but you'd miss it if it wasn't there. Boyd Cordner. The Wire. Just gritty as fuck. Tyson Frizzell. 60 Minutes. Was way better when it used to have balls. Jake Trebojevic. Black Mirror. Haven't been watching it for very long, but I already know I'm going to love it forever. Jack Whiten. Embarrassing Bodies. My curiosity made me want to watch it, but now that it's all over, I have regrets. Angus Crichton. The SBS Test Pattern. Cameron Murray. That episode of Game of Thrones with the Starbucks coffee cup blooper. That one major blunder just ruined the whole thing for me. Payne Haas. MasterChef. Some of it was attractive to watch, but in other parts, he just played like Matt Preston. And now it's time for our interview with former NRL referee Greg McCallum. Thanks for sparing some time to come on the Voluntary Tackle podcast today.
No worries at all, my pleasure.
I thought I might just start by talking a bit about yourself. How did you first get involved in refereeing?
I was a failed coach. I was a player, but I got ill with glandular fever when I was 19 and had one season coaching the under-7s and missed out on the next season because one of the fathers was on the committee that picked the coach. So I missed out there. And then ran into a guy that coached me at school who'd become a referee at 65 years of age. So he talked me into becoming a referee. So it was probably my third choice to be involved in the game, but certainly I wouldn't have swapped it for anything.
So there's a bit of serendipity or fate involved, and it sounds like you might have learned a bit about team politics as well at the same time.
I did, about politics and how things can easily come your way, but they can easily be taken away from you as well, and that sort of served me in good stead right through the season.
Greg, refereeing, would you consider it a tough job?
It has its moments. You grow into it. There's no doubt about that. It's something you can't go out and say, well, I'm going to become, the leading referee. I'm going to referee test matches or Origin. You need to go through the stages, and if they're fairly structured, you get good support along the way. But the higher up you go in being involved in refereeing, the more challenging it becomes, because you quickly realise that for every one referee that makes it successfully into the top echelon, there's probably 100 or 150 that don't. So it's a very competitive industry, and if you want to be at the top, you've got to sacrifice and you've got to go with the punches, as I said before.
Do you remember your first game? Was it a daunting experience the first time you ran out and officiated a match?
No, it was funny because once I decided to referee, I did some trial games in the Manly area when I wasn't a referee. I wasn't qualified, so I used to run around there. They were happy to have me in the trials because it was just an extra person to be able to referee the trial games. And then I got my ticket, and I do remember I remember the first game I played and the first game I coached, and I certainly refereed. And I remember that was down at St Matthew's Farm at Cromer, and it was an under sevens game, and I'll never forget it.
What was your strength as a ref, you think?
I think it was an understanding of the game. As I said, I played it for a number of years and was reasonably successful at it because I understood what the game was all about. And I think from then on it was the ability to listen, and I think the ability then to talk to players and I suppose have a good relationship with them. But having the understanding that, you can't have a game of rugby league, certainly without a referee, but you can't have a game of rugby league without players playing the game. And I suppose my hardline approach to foul play was something that I think carried me through, particularly in the latter years of getting into grade from the juniors, but right through my career, I didn't accept that players needed to go out there and commit fouls on other players, and that's part of the game.
So, Greg, is there a chance that there are fans that go, oh, it was Greg McCallum's fault that the biff's gone?
A little bit, and of course my role with the judiciary probably played a big part in that. I don't agree with the automatic sin binning for punching. I think, not that I condone it, I think it was probably an overreaction, and I think it took something, that confrontation, that physical collision between players, I think that took something away, and what we got in its place was what I would consider to be quite embarrassing incidents of pushing and shoving and slapping and all those sorts of things.
It's a weird look, isn't it? Especially when
it is a weird look.
Yeah, like a halfback comes up to a front rower and slaps him on the face. It just doesn't sit right.
Yeah. Or a winger runs in 50 metres and pushes a front rower in the back. I don't think that's right. But then look, I don't condone violence at all. As I said, I had a hardline stance as a referee.
Yep.
But I just think we've got to be really careful as administrators of the game, and I was an administrator in England for a long time, and you've got to be really careful how you change the rules and the impact that those rule changes have. And as I said, I'm not a big supporter of the punching you in the bin. The shoulder charge issue was slightly different because there was a lot of evidence to suggest that there were some serious head collisions taking place. But again, I don't know whether every shoulder charge warrants a penalty either. So, I believe that they're all parts of the game. The shoulder charge was always part of the game in that you can knock the opponent to the ground provided you don't make contact with the head. But then I was also, I saw a lot of statistics to show that missed shoulder charges ended up in fairly significant head collisions, which caused concussions. So.
What would you like to see, Greg, in terms of, instead of having a blanket rule about sin binning someone for striking, what would the Greg McCallum approach be if you were making those decisions?
I think put it back in the hands of the referee. The referee is still the best player, best person on the field to watch players and the way that they conduct themselves. I think the game became quite sterilised over the late 90s into the 2000s. I thought, the violence in the game of the 70s and 80s was gone. And I think teams understood that if they committed fouls, they would be possibly short of a player or they'll be penalised. So I'd like to put it back into the hands of the referees in terms of dealing with whatever happens on the field, they deal with.
I always felt, Greg, that, you're right, everyone was sort of getting on the same page with that, except for John Hopewadi.
You always get the odd one. The odd ball in the game would do that. No one can condone the way that John Hopewadi's conducted himself in those incidents.
Yeah, it's a tough one to defend, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. I was on the match review committee when we charged him for that flying forearm on Keith Galloway, and I think it almost finished Keith Galloway's career. That was how serious that was, and we had no hesitation in putting him out for 16 weeks for that.
No, I think that was the right call, and it was almost, I think, unanimous, even from memory. The Manly club, I think, thought, no, that's too far, right? So, to this day, that's always down in my mind as one of the heaviest collisions I remember ever seeing, because he was at full flight in the air.
Oh, it was an assault. He assaulted him mid-air, and I think it took Keith Galloway a number of years to recover from that.
Greg, you mentioned earlier that that one of your strengths is the fact that you understood the plight of players on the field. Does that come, do you think, because that you used to play yourself? Do you think referees should have to have had a bit of an experience playing the game?
Again, it's the old saying that good players don't become good coaches, and certainly players don't become good referees because they've played the game. But I think it plays a really important part in the foundation of your makeup involved in it.
Yeah.
You go through a lot, as I said, to become a referee. You go through a lot of analysing. You go through a lot of self-evaluation, and I think you do understand the game. And I think your good referees, I think, have been those that have played. But don't ever be put off if you want to become a referee just because you haven't played. It shouldn't stop you from becoming, a referee. And the females show that all the time. The girls haven't played any significant level of the game, but they're coming through as really good referees because they understand what they're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, even that's changing because the women's game is getting a higher profile these days. So we may even see more women coming through the referee ranks.
I hope so. I think it's great. I think women bring almost a soothing part to the game. I think guys these days tend to respect them pretty well. I don't see any player really go aggressively towards a woman. I think it's a really good thing.
Yeah, and it's a funny symmetry, Greg. I noticed, with a lot of the lollipop people around Sydney, they've replaced them with a lot of women because they've noticed motorists don't react as aggressively towards them. So maybe that'd be something for the NRL to look at as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the rugby league is a great game in that it gives everybody, no matter what sex they are and what background they come from, an opportunity to be involved either as a player, coach, or probably more effectively as a referee. I think it's a great way that the NRL in particular views the total community as a prospect of being involved in the game.
You talked about self-reflection too, Greg. Now, this is an opportunity, I guess. Can you ever remember a time in your refereeing career where you had to think about it later and you go, I really got that call wrong? Like, has there ever been a point where you've definitely gone, oh gosh, I shouldn't have made that call?
Definitely. It cost me a grand final, I think, in 1988. I was doing all the main games, and I refereed Penrith and Manly at Penrith Park when they opened up the new grandstand there. And it was a tough game. Manly were fighting for a top 2 finish, and the Panthers were fighting for a top 4 finish. And Mark Geyer made contact with Dale Shearer 10 minutes from the end of the game. And Shearer had just come back from a broken jaw. And Shearer was on the ground, and I saw the tackle as being late and rushed into the decision, which I now regret. I put him in the bin for 10 minutes, and as I looked up, the touch judge from the far side of the field, people will remember the day that touch judges used to come on the field.
Yeah, that's right.
Raised to report something. And as he came towards me, he was shaking his head. And I said, what's the matter? Peter Ryan was the touch judge's name. And he said, Greg, you hit him high. And of course, hitting him high and late, that's a dismissal. And I'd only put him in the bin for 10. And I knew exactly when that happened, that my prospects of refereeing my first grand final disappeared.
So you actually... sorry, Greg, I say you realised that in the moment, did you?
At the moment. As soon as he came on and he said to me he's hit him high, because I saw it as a late tackle. And to this day, from the angle I was at, there was never any concern or consideration from me that he'd hit him high, but the touch judge saw it from the other side. And, of course, the video doesn't lie. I went home and looked at the video, hung my head, and I knew that was the end. And I went from probably the number 1 rated referee going into the finals to number 4.
Oh, no.
So it really impacted on me, and I'll never forget it. And I wake up some nights in a cold sweat seeing Mark Geyer's face.
Oh, no. We've actually had MG on the show before. I wish I knew that before.
Great character. Yeah, great character. But by the crikey, he was a tough man out there. He was a tough player.
Look, that's a good segue, Greg, actually. I was going to ask you about, I guess, teams that were hard to control or even players that were hard to control. People like MG, obviously, a lot of the time he speaks about, his coaches giving him license to sort of cause mayhem on the field. Have you got anyone in particular that you remember just being really difficult to control?
Look, back in my era, you had a lot of, I suppose, bullets to your gun with players. You could put them in the bin and no one would bat an eyelid. If Steve Roach would come up to you and say, "You're going to be kidding," because Steve had a very high voice. "You're going to be kidding." And so, well, you're in the bin. And no one would bat an eyelid. Well, Steve Roach has been sent to the sin bin again. But to put a player in the bin these days, it becomes a major catastrophe in the game, doesn't it? And players that committed fouls were sent off, and I suppose in that regard, the referee had more control over what was happening out on the field in his own hands rather than in the hands of the bunker official or anybody else. And as a result, you learnt to control the game yourself. And that's what players wanted. And I refereed in an era where Balmain and Souths and Canterbury were the three really aggressive sides. And every time Souths played Balmain, I was appointed to the game, or Souths versus Canterbury. But you then got to learn what you were looking for, and without prejudging anything. When Mario got tackled and Benny was there, well, you were there too. You stayed at the play of the ball until it was done and moved on to the next confrontation. And you got to know the players, and you got to know how you had to handle it, and then the players got to know how you were going to handle it too. And that's where you do start to get that relationship going. There was a large amount of respect.
Yep.
Between the players and the referees, but it was earned respect. It wasn't demanded respect or respect that was given lightly. It was earned.
Did you relish the opportunity to kind of referee the more aggressive teams? Like, it sounds as though you had a bit of a strategy ahead of the time. You knew who the candidates were going to be that might cause mischief. So did you actually look forward to that opportunity?
I did, and whenever those games were coming up, I sort of penciled them in my own mind. There was a likelihood that I'd get appointed to those games, and it suited my style, and it suited, I think, the game at the time to have one or two referees that they could rely upon that would go out there and take control of the situation, and we used to do it. And it was, you never thought twice about it. It was either you or them in terms of being there to be appointed the next week. So it was either survive or perish.
And who were you among your contemporaries, Greg, were good referees at controlling those kind of games?
Oh, look, Mick Stone was highly rated at the time. Graham Annesley, of course, the head of football for the NRL, was a very close colleague of mine, and we refereed in the same era. Bill Harrigan came along halfway through it, sent shockwaves, of course, because we were all at training just doing it at our own pace, and of course Bill arrived as a member of the tactical response squad, super fit, so we all had to pick it up, and in a lot of ways Bill Harrigan revolutionised refereeing with his fitness, and we all had to step up our game, otherwise Bill would have rushed away with us, and he did. He did 3 grand finals very quickly, but I suppose the thing that I'm most proud of is that once he did his 3 grand finals, I knocked him off and did 3 after that. So
there you go.
That was something that I and I put it down. Look, I increased my fitness, but I put it down to the fact that I understood the game really well, and I was able to control games that perhaps Bill had trouble with in that era. It's one thing to be fit and running around, but I knew the rules, and I knew how to get on with the players.
Did you ever think when Bill first arrived, Greg, and was carving it up at training, that you might just, I don't know, maybe break a fibula just to bring him down a little bit?
Look, Bill intimidated everyone with his fitness. And Bill was this young, brash guy, Bill was on a mission, and he had great support from the boss of the referees at the time, Dennis Braybrook. There was one time there, I tell the story that there was a group of referees, Graham Annesley, Mick Stone, Dennis Baggerino, John Gosha, and our wives would go out for dinner 2 or 3 times a year, and we were called the first grade squad because we're all in first grade, and we all went out to dinner. And then halfway through the 1986 season, when Bill Harrigan hit there, all of us were in reserve grade. We'd all been dropped for some reason, and we went out for dinner one night, not the first grade panel, but we're all in reserve grade.
All at once.
And that was Dennis Braybrook coming in, and Bill Harrigan, Phil Cooley, Greg Boyd, they were guys that were coming through the younger brigade, and us oldies were certainly given notice that the times were changing. But as it worked out, I think Kevin Roberts went back to first grade, did the grand final that year, and we all ended up back in first grade the year after. So we all had to knuckle down, though. It was a challenge, and it was a wake-up call.
Greg, was there ever any animosity between, you sort of described that as youngies and oldies, was there ever a divide or personality conflicts within the refereeing ranks during your day?
Sure, there were personality conflicts, but we all, in the end, we're all referees. We all had to train together. You didn't pick who you were appointed with. You had to go out there as a team. And I think, the successful referees were able to do that. I know that some referees struggled with personalities, and once they got their appointments and saw they were running with a certain touch judge, they headed drop and think, oh no, I'm not going to get
dear.
the support I need. But again, it was one of those things I learned that everybody has levels of ability. Everybody has good points. Some touch judges would maybe think the same with me. When they were appointed to run with me, that there was parts of my game that they probably didn't like. But at the end of it, as long as you stay consistent and true to your being as a person and as a referee, then success should follow.
You finished off your career, mate, on a high, I believe, refereeing the 1994 Grand Final between the Dogs and the Raiders. I certainly remember it as one of the great grand finals for me, other than the fact that I remember Mal Meninga putting on a few huge hits as well. Was that up there as one of your most memorable matches? Or if not, what were some of the big games that you can remember and that you were really proud to be a part of?
Yeah, it's a really good question to think back on. I think being appointed to my first grand final in '92, because it broke that sort of reign of Bill Harrigan coming through, Graham Annesley and I were given an opportunity to referee the semi-finals ahead of Bill, and we both did okay the first week and were retained for the second, and I went on to do the grand final. So that was a significant milestone in my career, I think. I was fortunate. I refereed test matches before I did Origin and grand final. So, I did 4 trips to England and refereed Great Britain and New Zealand because it was all under the neutral referee system. So, I went to there 4 times, and that ultimately led me to go to England to live and to work over with the Rugby Football League over there. And the other one I remember is, the first Origin game. State of Origin was a big thing back in the late 80s, and I did my first game, ironically, at the Sydney Football Stadium in front of just 16,000 people. It was a dead rubber game, and Queensland flogged New South Wales, so I think 38 points to 16 or something like that, and won the series 3-0. Whilst it was a memorable game for me, it probably doesn't rate in the memory of too many New South Wales players or supporters.
No, unfortunately, Queensland flogging New South Wales could be any game these days, couldn't it?
Exactly right, any year, that's right. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
But no, look, I have great memories, and I have great memories of the people I ran with. I have great memories of the players I refereed, and just being part of the game, and being successful at it was just a bonus.
What about the modern game, Greg? Do you like what you're seeing from the refs so far this year? I know you said your close colleague, Graham Annesley's sort of taken over. My perception is that it's a whole lot better than last year, not to put words in your mouth. How have you found it?
I've got to say, they were grim last year. It was a poor year for refereeing. It came on a number of poor years. So I thought the referees had lost their composure in terms of applying the rules of the game. It was sort of a mishmash of interpretation and not wanting to give penalties, and they lack leadership. And the leadership's back this year. It's far better. I think everybody in the game, I think, acknowledges that the game is a better game being refereed the way it's being refereed. The problem with refereeing, you cannot go out there and prejudge anything, and if you've got these systems that are going to evaluate you, in the back of your mind, have I given enough penalties? I've done this and done that. Well, then you can't referee what's in front of you. And I think Graham, to his credit, has taken all that away and gone back to referee what's in front of you. And we've still got to find the balance between the bunker and on-field decisions, because every try basically is being referred up to the bunker again. And part of the problem with technology is you want perfection in a game that's not perfect. And if you send every decision up to the bunker will start to make decisions that aren't right. And that's what we've got to protect against.
On that front of technology, I mean, do you, in essence, like having the video ref there, or would you prefer to see a game where, back in your days, as you said, the referee was more omnipotent, had a lot more power? Do you like the video ref being there, or do you...
Well, I've got to say I do, because I invented it in England. So
okay,
it was
fair enough.
over there first in 1995 before it came here, and not many people know that, but it was...
I didn't do my research, Greg.
For the rugby league over there, and so look, it came in because I was convinced by people in the UK. A guy named Neville Smith, who was an Australian, who was an ex-referee with me at Manly. He was the executive producer of Sky Sports, and he came to me after I'd started the job in England and said, look, can I show you this system? And I looked at it, and I sort of, like everything, I just shook my head and said, well, that won't work. And he left me the video, and I sat down one day in the office and analysed it and thought, well, this could work. But it was only about making decisions in the end goal.
Yeah.
And particularly when the ball was loose, bouncing around, because he showed me a whole lot of tries that weren't tries, or were ruled incorrectly. And from there, it just sort of mushroomed into this overpowering controller of the game. And look, it's never going to go away, but we've got to make sure that we give as much power as we can to the on-field officials to make decisions. And if the odd one's wrong, then we have to run with it, because they're still getting them wrong in the bunker. And we've got to make sure that we don't allow the bunker to get any bigger than what it is at the moment.
I love that. And I actually think it's in a pretty good balance this year. As you said, maybe they're going a little bit too regularly for some tries, but there was a point where, the eye in the sky was sort of intervening quite regularly in the game. And I've always had the opinion that, during that period, there was probably referees that maybe weren't even watching the game as closely because they knew they could rely upon the referee technology. And I got to get the feeling that, empowering the referees has actually made them better in the last couple of years. Would you agree with that?
Definitely this year. I think it's good. I'd love to see the touch judges go back to actually making a decision. I saw one the other night. In the end, the decision's right. It was in Origin where Oates, in the first half, stood on the touchline.
Yep.
The touch judge was convinced that he'd done that, but I would have loved to have seen him put his flag up, and make a decision to say, no, he's gone into touch, because that's all part of decision making. Otherwise, why have people running up and down the touchline if they're not going to make decisions? It's
absolutely.
I'd love to just see that balance come back a little bit more to all of the people that are involved in the game, touch judges, the pocket ref, the main ref, actually continue to make decisions, because I think it will then regulate the use of the bunker. And I know that's looking for utopia, but it's got to be better than sending every decision up to be cleared by the bunker.
How do you feel about the idea, Greg, of the captain's challenge? Do you give that any credit as a potential way to go forward?
I sat and watched a semi-final series in the under-20s a few years ago, and I saw 3 decisions challenged and 3 decisions overturned. And had they not been overturned, the team that benefited from the challenges would have been eliminated. I think it's a great thing to do. I think, the referee is still the best person to make the decision. If he makes the decision, then I think if either side doesn't agree with it or whatever, then they should challenge it, and then the bunker makes the decision.
I love it too, because it seems to also maybe even relieve some of that bad taste in players' mouths when they feel like they've been hard done by. This gives them a little bit of power, doesn't it, to go, well, you could challenge it, and if you don't challenge it, then it's sort of on you a little bit as well.
Exactly, and because it's on the coaches and the clubs at the end of the game, they're the ones that make the issues out of it. I would give them the opportunity to do that. I don't think it's a bad thing to say, look, let's have a look at this. And as I said, the game I watched, there were 3 decisions, one after the other, that would have eliminated, aside from the semi-finals, had there not been captain's challenge.
Yeah, it's certainly got a lot of credit in my view. I've got an interesting... I definitely couldn't have you on the show and not ask you this. If there was one rule change that you could implement and you had the power to do it in 2019, what would you like to see changed?
Look, I think it's more the interpretations. I think the rules of the game are pretty good at the moment. It's the interpretation of players, and it's a throwback to this panic that there was a couple of years ago. Players with the ball have certain obligations to play in the play the ball process. The play the ball process is fundamental to the whole game. The defence has to set on where the play the ball is. I get so frustrated when I see players walk off the mark and take advantage, and then occasionally they get pulled up and sent back to play the ball. Well, in the rule book it says that's a penalty. You move off the mark, then that's a penalty. If you don't control the player with the ball, you've got little control over the defensive line. And if I was a defending player, I'd be really frustrated at the moment that where do you stand? Because players do not play the ball where they're tackled, and they deliberately move off the mark. And it's probably not such a rule change because the rule's there. It's the interpretation of doing that. But throughout my career, I've seen some great rule changes. The 40-20, spectacular. I think removing the corner post out of play has created this marvellous athletic performance by the players to score tries.
For sure.
I'm not too sure about the 7-tackle business from kicks. I think that's probably something that I'd like to see change back, that you don't get a 7th tackle.
Yeah, I particularly.
When you kick the ball dead.
I don't know if you give this any thought, Greg, but I mean, my biggest grievance about the 7-tackle rule is it sort of came in to stop people kicking the ball dead from 50 out, like when Jamie Soward used to do it to get the defensive line set. Could they not say if you've kicked it dead from trying to thread a grubber through in the 20-metre zone, for example, it's just back to where it was? I thought maybe it should be better to penalise them if they've kicked it when they're 50 metres out.
Yeah. Look, I think the game is, you've got a bunker system there, and I know that goes against what I've just been saying about the bunker, but it might happen once or twice a game. If in the view, and everything in the game is in the view of the referee or the bunker, if the kick is kicked in a way that it's a non-competitive kick, i.e. it's just kicked dead, then 7 tackles would apply if it's just kicked dead. If it doesn't, it's an attacking kick that could result in a try, then you don't get the 7 tackles from there.
It just seems like a heavy penalty when it's just gone dead and it was almost a try. It just doesn't seem to ring true. So yeah, I think you've got a good point there.
I think it was a panic decision made by people who were running the referees at the time to try and overcome an issue in the game that probably wasn't such a big issue.
Yeah, fair enough too.
When it's all washed up, yeah.
In your time, Greg, I won't keep you for too much longer because I know you're a busy man, but in your time reffing, I was interested. We're a bit of an unconventional podcast at times. Was there any strange incidents that you can remember on the field? What was one of the strangest things you ever remember seeing, either from the crowd or from players?
Oh, look, there's been a whole lot of issues. One of the problems we did have when I first started refereeing in first grade was that people would run on the field as soon as the full-time hooter went. And spectators were allowed to run on. And sometimes a penalty would be given and you have to clear the field to take the penalty and all that sort of thing. So they tried to change that by stopping the clock with 5 minutes to go.
Yep.
So nobody really knew when the time was up. I think, the ability to have a safe playing environment for not just the players, but for the referees is really important. And I remember one day at Redfern Oval, which was a really interesting place to referee, let me tell you, over the years. I was doing Souths and Wests, and we got invaded, right on full time. And there was a guy ran past me and bumped me in the back or in the side. Which felt like something sharp, and I said when I came off the ground, I think somebody ran on with a knife, and I knew straight away as soon as I said that there's another time when I wish I'd had time to say things properly.
Yep.
Of course, then there was massive inquiry that a spectator ran on with a knife and all that sort of thing. But one of the other people came forward and said, "I know it was the end of a flag. We saw the ref get hit with the flag, so it wasn't a knife." But things like that they happen on the spur of the moment, and it's how you react to them. I didn't react that well to it by saying that I thought it was a knife, and probably gave John Quayle further reason to lose some more hair.
But I guess if he takes, you've got to take that take that seriously as a potential, don't you? So are you saying that, Greg, that you'd prefer to see that back again? The idea that the crowd can come onto the field after the game?
No, not well after the game.
Yeah,
I think some clubs do it well. I think the new stadium at Parramatta allows people on the field. There's a hooter goes and they can come on. I think it's really good for kids to come onto the field, but you've got to get this environment safe as you can for everybody involved in the game, and then once they're in the safety of their dressing room, then certainly allow people on the field.
Talking about safety, Greg, there's a number of our listeners have campaigned to bring back the biff, and I know you've said it's an important thing to clean up the game and all those kind of things, and I agree with you. And I was wondering if there could be some middle ground where a team allows a designated biffer So there's only one person who's allowed to bring on a Barney, only 1.5. Do you think that might fly in the modern game?
I don't think that'd get a start in the modern game, but it certainly would keep everybody happy. That there's no doubt that people felt aggrieved when the biff was removed from the game, for want of a better word. It was what everybody was brought up on. Yep. Everybody was brought up on the early origins. There was a brawl in those every time, and test matches between Australia and England, there were brawls in those, and it took a long time for that to get out of people's systems, and I still talk to people, probably a little bit older than me, that bemoan the fact that there isn't biff in the game. The rugby league is a physically confronting game, and the collisions that take place in it, can be as hard as you like, but as long as players aren't hit in the head is the key factor, or aren't hit when they're being blindsided, or a hit when they're being blindsided, I should say, when they can't defend themselves. They're the problems. And, is it any worse? I argue sometimes, is it any worse than some of that grappling that was done back when I was on the match review committee, where we're having to put players out for twisting people's necks and heads and coming down on the back of their head and, potentially putting them in a position where they could break their neck, and that all comes out of a result because players are looking to get over the top physically of their opponent. And, it's the balance that's got to be the thing. And I don't think we'll see the biff back in our lifetime, but it certainly should never be just brushed aside in terms that it's no good for the game, because everybody in the first 80 or 90 years of the game were brought up that it was a physically confronting game.
I agree with you, mate, and I actually think there is credence to the idea that, because they're not allowed to throw a punch these days, that the aggression comes out in other ways. And in a way, I'd almost argue that, the more indirect or cowardly hitting of players when they're not front on, or twisting of necks, I actually think that's more dangerous, to be completely honest. But that's just me.
We've seen players taken out when they're in the air kicking, and that's just incredibly dangerous to see that happen. And and the last couple of weeks we've seen actual players headbutting, so that's been an interesting phenomenon that's crept back into the game.
In the South game, we actually had the biff come back momentarily, so it was interesting to see.
But I don't think we'll see too much of it more in the future.
Greg, now I understand you're a wedding celebrant as well these days. Is that correct? Yeah. Why do you choose jobs with so much public pressure on them?
It was just something that I got involved because I used to do a lot of public speaking and I used to host weddings, and I thought to myself, well, there's a little something missing from my bow there, and that's to actually do the ceremony. But I love doing, because I love meeting people, and it's been a very rewarding part of my life for the last 10 years to be able to have share such a happy occasion with families. And everybody remembers, though. They all come up to me, and Uncle Jim comes up, or even Aunt Martha will come up and say, I remember when you refereed South versus West, and you did this and did that. It's amazing that people don't forget.
You're always imprinted in people's minds. I know that's a funny thing, isn't it? Because I guess, when you're on a stage, whether it's a wedding or an NRL match, like people do remember, like they're going to have a reason to remember you. So I'd imagine, do you ever get approached much out in public?
Oh, occasionally, yeah. I'm sort of involved in public life at Blacktown Council. I meet a lot of the community there, and they all seem to remember something about that I was involved. I think it's the beard. They remember the beard and say, oh, you're the only ref that had a beard.
There you go.
Yeah.
And look,
one bloke yelled out to me one day, he said, Bill Harrigan, you were the best ref. And I yelled back, I'm not Bill Harrigan.
You should have taken the rap, Greg, just whatever it is. Any compliment that comes your way, take it.
Right.
Any of our listeners, mate, want to get in touch if they've got a wedding coming up? Is there? What's your best way to be reached?
At Greg McCallum Celebrant. So www.gregmccallumcelebrant.com.au.
And I tell you, it'll be great if someone got hitched on the back of the Voluntary Tackle podcast. That would just make my week. So we'll see.
That'd be good.
We'll see if it happens. Mate, just to finish off, if you're okay with it, I just had a couple of fan questions come through on Twitter. The first one comes from Mark Wyatt, and he wants to know why the referees don't enforce a rule that keeps trainers off the field unless they're absolutely needed. Is that a bit of a gripe of yours?
Oh, yeah. And when I was in England, we got more correspondence from fans about trainers being on the field than anything else in the game. And it was every year I was there. Most people are sick of it. I don't understand why they need to be on there, and I understand the game, but I don't understand why they need to be there. I think it looks bad. I think it sends out a really ordinary look for the game, and I know that they've had a couple of goes at trying to restrict it in recent times, but I really would wish that someone would get hold of it and try and change it.
I wouldn't actually mind it, Greg, so long as they were kind of open game for a player to put a shoulder charge on. So you can be out there, but if someone like Sam Burgess comes through and puts a hit on you, then it's all good.
Yeah, I'm surprised there hasn't been some trainers and physios knocked over. One of the issues we had when I was on the match review committee, not so much in first grade, but in the lower grades, we had there'd be a brawl take place, and you'd have the trainers run on there and get in between the players, which is not a good thing.
No,
that was only ever going to end one way.
Yep, with a few unconscious trainers. Greg, mate, I'm going to wrap it there, but you've been very generous of your time. Thanks so much for coming on the Voluntary Tackle today. Really
Anytime,
appreciate
my
it.
pleasure.
Mate, and hopefully we can speak down the track.
That'd be lovely.
But now it's time for some Voluntary Tackle Q&A. We've had plenty of questions roll into the show, and we thank you very much for that, and I'll certainly do my best to answer those burning, vexing inquiries for you now. But just a note to those who specifically asked for a shower cream pubic hair burning performance, no way, Jose. That's for Patreon subscribers, and you fucking know that. All right, the first question comes from a rather irate Jeffrey Smith, who asks, if Cleary is such a shit coach, then why were the West Tigers better under him last year than since Maguire took over? Well, Jeff, considering the Tigers finished 9th last year and are currently 10th, I'm not convinced you can make that judgment just yet, to be honest. For me, the real question for Tigers fans is this. Would you prefer a coach who looks dazed and confused, or one that looks more like an angry and less svelte version of Jason Statham? Look, Jeff, I acknowledge these choices aren't exactly enticing. It's like being asked, which object would you prefer to repeatedly ram up your anus? A Tamagotchi or an Atari Lynx? Neither option seems especially palatable, and I think most people would elect simply not to be a fan of the Tigers anymore before being anally penetrated with early 90s entertainment tech. I hope that covers all of your concerns, Jeff. Next up, we have a question from Gavin, who asks, who got more triggered after Origin? Was it Blues fans or Manly fans because DCE got picked as Queensland captain? Look, this is a relatively easy one, Gavin. Blues fans is the correct answer. Manly fans were actually quite happy to have DCE out of the state for a while. With the turfing out of Tony Abbott recently at the last election and the absence of Cherry, Manly's smug numbers were actually down to record levels last week. Coincidentally, it also saw ticket sales for Taronga Zoo skyrocket as people north of the bridge were forced for the first time in a while to pay and see the giraffes, which was obviously quite the boon for the local economy. I hope that answers your question, Gavin. The next question comes from Media Watch Mario. G'day, Mario. He's pondering, why are hippos so much cooler than rhinos? Personally, Mario, I'm not sure they are cooler as such, but they certainly are more hardcore than rhinos. I mean, any animal that can callously murder more Africans a year than Idi Amin managed to during his reign of terror must be feared. Now, that obviously doesn't make them cool. That would be a very racist endorsement. But for a hippo's ability to carry out acts of mass murder with ease, well, to those murderous bastards, I doff my coffee to them. The next question comes from Sandy Hunter, who asks, Channel 9 making Freddie talk to Gus during Origin. What a joke. Was this a contractual agreement? Great question, Sandy, and I completely agree with you. It's just awkward more than anything else. The game was on the line on Wednesday and the Blues were under the pump, and Freddie was forced to put on a brave face for the cameras. I mean, he can't exactly say, I'm shitting it, and I hope Cody Walker decides to attend the game mentally soon. He's between a rock and a hard place, really, and it's just weird for the viewer. Seems a bit like holding a public hanging and then interviewing the family of the recently executed as they dangle fidgeting on the end of the rope, how they thought the execution went. I mean, what can you say when people you love are getting murdered in front of your eyes? Quote the VB Hard Work Index about the hangman? I don't think so. Now it's time for our interview with former South player Sean Garlick.
Hi, Sean speaking.
G'day, Sean. It's Eamon here from the Voluntary Tackle, mate. How you going?
Good, mate. Thanks for calling.
No worries, mate. No, thank you for sparing some time, mate. I know you're a busy man for coming onto the show. Really, I guess just to start off, you wear so many hats, mate. You were an NRL player, you're a policeman, businessman, actor, involved in football operations. You're on the judiciary panel, mate. I can barely run an NRL podcast. You certainly know how to make a man feel really bad about himself.
Oh, thanks, mate. Look, I suppose I've just always been busy. It's something, even as a kid, I had lots of things going on, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Yes, I'm also, add to that, I'm president of our local golf club out here at Little Bay the Coast Golf Club, which takes up a little bit of more time, but it's a passion of mine as well.
Of course you are, Sean. I'm sure you've probably got a spot on the UN as well.
Not quite, no, not quite,
Mate,
mate.
I guess just on your league career, I guess a good starting point might be to just ask how you got involved in rugby league and I guess who your junior team was.
Sure, mate. Well, I suppose I just grew up being a rugby league tragic, watching it on TV. I remember in the mid-'70s, I suppose, in my first memories of rugby league, remember the Roosters playing in those grand finals in the mid-'70s when I was only a 5 and 6-year-old. And then, I took up rugby league about the same time. Believe it or not, I actually was living in Rockdale at the time with the family, and I got taken down to Arctic Scots by my father. It was my first taste of rugby league, playing for Arctic Scots. And then my father got relocated at work, and we got moved out to Laparoos, and I became a member of the Laparoos United junior rugby league team in the South Sydney competition. And became a South Sydney Tragic back then in what was and still is a very, very strong junior rugby league competition in the South District. And Sean,
what were your memories of playing around Laparoos? Because as you said, it's almost a religion around those parts, isn't it, rugby league?
Look, it is, and I was very lucky in some respects. I went to a primary school, Laparoos Primary, which is a very tiny primary school. We only just had enough players to form a team, and but we were never ever beaten. I played with the likes of Graham Lyons, who you might remember when I played Origin from the Rabbitohs. And I played with the youngest Ella brother, Timmy Ella, and just a lot of natural young Koori kids that were just rugby league stars, could do anything on the field. And we never lost a game right through our primary school. We won state knockouts. And then I went to a high school called Matraville High, which was famous for rugby union. Had all the Ella brothers playing in there, Russell Fairfax and the Walkers, and we were a bunch of league players, and were forced to play rugby union because that's all they played there, and we virtually won everything there as well. Just league players playing union, and it was a great start to I suppose competitive footy, and then I made my way through the junior ranks and eventually got graded in the Rabbitohs. It was their first under-21s team in 1988, and was lucky to go into a pretty good team there as well, and play with the likes of Manoa Thompson and Rick and Steve Stone and Darren Brown and Rod Maybon and Scott Wilson, Blake Butcher. And we ended up winning the comp in 1989. The same year, the first grade were minor premiers at the Rabbitohs, so it was a very strong club at the time, back in the late 80s. And then I made my first grade debut the following year as a 20-year-old. In first grade against Penrith out of Penrith Park.
Mate, I was going to ask you about your debut game, but just before I get to that, were you always a hooker even in those junior teams, or did you move around a bit?
Look, I was a hooker or a halfback in the very early days. I suppose by the time I got to about, 16, I pretty much focused on being a hooker. And in those days, the leather football, I remember I was trialling for, it was SG Ball at the time, and it came down to two hookers. It was Geordie Peets and myself. And what they did was the two coaches, they couldn't split us, and so they packed us down in opposing scrums, and it was who won the most scrums. It was who was the best rake.
That's amazing.
And so as it turned out, Geordie was better. And so he got the nod ahead of me, and and I sort of. I was sort of behind him for the next few years, but there were some really strong teams and players. I remember when I first got graded. Geordie Peets, I was lucky. He pretty much went to Canterbury almost straight away. But obviously, Mario Fennick was the first grade hooker. There was also another hooker in front of him by the name of Paul Judd. There was Craig Weeks. There was Stephen Fennick, who was a year older than me. And I was just lucky that sort of things can come your way, and the planets aligned. There was injuries, there was suspensions, there was all sorts of things, and I got my crack when really there was probably 4 or 5 hookers ahead of me at the club at the time.
And that's an interesting point as well, isn't it, Sean, that the fact that the hooker role has changed so much. It's interesting that you say that, it was determined on who could be the best rake when that's probably not really a part of the modern day role for the hooker position, is it?
It's not at all. It's changed completely. Look, I'm still a little bit mixed on whether I sort of, like the way the scrums are these days. But I suppose when we look back, there was a lot of disruption. They were. The scrums would pack it, come out the same tunnel, you'd pack it again and go through the other side, they'd pack it again. There was penalties, I suppose, every second time. So, look, I suppose the way it is now, it's much more pleasing on the eye. Although I remember it was hard work. You'd come out of the scrum exhausted and you'd get into trouble if you didn't jog to the scrum. Nowadays, when the ball goes into touch, everyone straight away goes into the walk. You get the hell blasted out of you if you walk to a scrum in the early 90s, for sure.
That's crazy, isn't it? Because that's almost a tactic these days to get a bit of a blow from kicking it out. So interesting that you say that. I don't want it to be a digression, Sean, but I do know that you've also done a bit of acting as well. Was that ever a serious career path for you, or was it always going to be rugby league?
Look, it was something I did as a kid. I started as a 10-year-old doing commercials and bit parts in movies and mini-series and Australian serials. And I suppose the two of them, which was quite a good little hobby to have on the side. It was good pocket money. And there was one, they were casting for a movie. It was going to be the biggest budget Australian movie ever made in 1985. I was a 15-year-old, and it was Rachel Ward starred, and it was based on loosely based on a true story where one teacher school got kidnapped in Victoria, in rural Victoria. Anyway, I went through all the auditions, went for about 4 or 5 of them. I came down to the last 2 kids for this starring role. Anyway, I had to fly to Melbourne on this Saturday to meet with the director and all the other kids that they'd assembled from around Australia. And it coincided with a state knockout final that was going to be played at the SCG. And so I had to tell them that I couldn't go. And I remember my agent at the time was absolutely furious. She said, "Look, you'll never get another chance like this. This is a chance of a lifetime. You say no, but you'll never work in this industry ever again." I said, "I'm sorry, but we've got this grand final. We're playing at the SCG. It was a huge." I said, "I just can't." So I chose rugby league. Anyway, the funny thing was the director rang me on the Monday and said, "Oh, Sean, I heard you're no longer interested in this job." I said, "No, it's not that. It's that I had to play football on the weekend." Anyway, he said, "Well, what about if you were to come down this weekend?" So I went down the following weekend and I got the movie, and it was a great start. It was, I starred opposite Rachel Ward and Asher Keddy and Rebecca Rigg at the time. It was the biggest budget Australian movie. It was called Fortress, and I still have it on DVD.
It's amazing, isn't it? These kind of like sliding door moments that exist. What drew you away towards rugby league other than acting? Was it ever something that you seriously contemplated, following through into adulthood?
Look, what I did until the age of about 21 or 22, where I'd get a call and said, did you want to do this or did you want to do that? And if it coincided all right with training, and then I did it. In fact, you might remember there was a show on TV called Heartbreak High.
I do indeed, Sean. I remember it well.
Through the 90s, anyway, I worked in the police the whole time I played football until Super League came in, and I had to drop back to 1 day a week. But funnily enough, I got cast as a policeman in this role, and the storyline was that there was this sort of out of control sort of runaway kid in the show, and believe it or not, it was Craig Wing. Wing is about a 13-year-old.
Oh, no way!
So it was just amazing when he progressed through the ranks of the Rabbitohs, and in '98 he was the youngest player in the team, and I was the oldest, and we met up again. Look, I loved it. It was a terrific sort of hobby. What it did do, it forced you into presenting yourself and speaking in front of a group of strangers. You had to go and read your lines at a casting or an audition, and so it gave you confidence. Which I think helped me later on in life, especially when I became the captain of the team. and communication and being, just being out there and being confident was a really big part of that role.
And Sean, I'm assuming that there might have been a few players when you were, for example, I can see the timelines map onto when you were doing Heartbreak High. You were also playing footy. Did your teammates ever give you stick over that?
Oh, well, of course, all the time, And I remember actually turning up for one day, and it was after a game, and I got a bump on the nose and had two black eyes. And when I turned up for this role, they had to put the makeup on so thick to cover these two black eyes that my face looked a bit green when it came out later on from the black shining through. But look, it was a really good time. Oh, look, I even got some calls later in life. I remember I was at the Roosters in '97, so I was a 28-year-old, and I got a call from a director who was a mad Rooster supporter. He said, "We're doing a show," and it was based on the story on Christopher Dale Flannery when he got sent to jail, and he was it was called Tough Nuts, is the show, and they needed a prison warden who sort of roughed him up. He said, "Mate, are you still doing this sort of thing?" I said, "Man, I haven't done this for about 8 years." He said, "Would you have me come along and play this role as a prison warden?" Anyway, I did, and so I was still playing football then. I copped a lot of stick, but it still airs from time to time now on Foxtel.
Do you get royalties from that?
Look, funnily enough, I did this Lots of Noodles commercial when I just turned 17. It was the first day I got my license. I remember, so I was able to drive to this shoot. Anyway, it was one day. It was a Lots of Noodles ad, and it ran for about 7 years. And I got paid every single year that it ran. It was money for nothing. I couldn't believe it. But how good is this industry? You get paid year after year for not actually doing anything.
How good's that? If only that could happen in rugby league, Sean.
Correct, yeah, if only that was the case, yeah. Unfortunately, when you can no longer get on the field or no longer train, in this day and age, they soon ship you off.
Mate, back to footy world. Tell me a bit about your debut game. That first day you played first grade, what was that like?
Look, I came into the team in 1990. The Rabbitohs won the minor premiership the year before, so it was still a star-studded team. I remember we actually won the Wooden Spoon. We went from minor premiers to Wooden Spooners in 1990. And on this day, I made my debut. I think it was midway through the year with 22 rounds in those days, and I made my debut round 11 against Penrith Panthers out there at Penrith Park. Had the likes of Mark Geyer and Greg Alexander and Royce Simmons and a young Brad Fittler. And they flogged us. They beat us about 40 points to 6 or something like that. It was. I remember Mark Guy, who was just huge, picked me up and dropped me down on my tailbone. Actually, came from behind, got me to great big bear hug and slammed me back down. I landed on my backside, pain went right up my back into the back of my head, and he looked over the top of me and said, "Come on, stop acting."
Yeah, he was obviously aware of your background. I guess that's a good segue, mate. I mean, you were a smaller man in a big man's game, I guess. What did you have to do as a player to cope with these giant bodies like MG coming at you week after week?
Look, in those days it was about a bit more fitness. Obviously the interchange was when I first came to first grade. Dane chose. You might remember it was 2 fresh reserves, and the other 2 had to come from reserve grade.
Yep.
But once the change was made, you couldn't come back up again. So, being a smaller man, I really had to rely on the bigger blokes getting tired towards the end of each half. Which is a bit of a sad element of the game that's been lost these days. With the 8 interchanges these days, you're always, you're running at always fresh defensive lines, and fresh marker defence.
Yep.
Whereas back in those days, you could rely on big block of Roach or Ciro or, big Spud Carroll, once you've got the man and all that, they'd get a bit tired, Big Chief, they'd naturally get a bit tired as the half wore on, and that was the time where the little hookers and little halves got a chance to exploit gaps around the rucks, which just don't exist as much anymore. You've got to have the speed of Damien Cook now to really take advantage of those gaps that are just so much smaller these days.
And it seems only fair, doesn't it, Sean, that they've got the size and the strength that the little men have got to be brought into the game as well. They've reduced the interchange over the years slightly, which I'm assuming from what you're saying you'd like to see that interchange reduced even more?
I would, yeah. I mean, there's been talk that they're going to bring it back to 6.
Yeah.
And immediately that makes it more difficult for the biggest blokes, You've only got there's been plenty of stats that have been put out these days on just how much bigger players are these days. I mean, I think that's just naturally the case. Kids are bigger these days. They're bigger feet. They're just bigger all round. But it certainly plays into the hands of the big Polynesians who struggle with the endurance and that part of the game, but it's just so dynamic. And I suppose it will bring the little bloke back a little bit more. The other big thing that sort of pushed the little bloke out is the wrestle in the tackle these days. Like I was known as a legs tackler, and in this day and age, if you tackle around the legs, it's a quick play the ball, which defensive lines just can't contend with.
Yep.
I've been an advocate of really rewarding one-on-one tackles, which would really go towards the gang tackle, the wrestle, and the injuries that are occurring when you've got 2, 3, and 4 in the tackle.
Yeah.
I mean, all players are coached these days to catch the first guy. The second guy comes in over the top and holds, and then the third guy comes in around the legs and brings them down. And it's that third guy in when the player's stationary and pretty much defenceless, coming down and falling awkwardly, that I think contributes a lot to our injuries. Whereas the old one-on-one legs tackle, it was as exciting as a player making a break. The cover tackle or just the one-on-one where the little bloke brings down the big fella, whether it's from marker or from in the line. Was something we just don't see anymore, which is, I think, an element of the game that's really been lost.
I agree with you, mate. And it's funny, I thought the legs tackle was completely dead until Jake Trbojevic turned up. And he's got a bit of a knack of being able to affect the legs tackle in the modern game, and it's extremely effective. It doesn't seem to lead to a really quick play the ball. So who knows, it might still make a return.
Yeah, well, Jake, I mean, he's a big fella, he's big and strong, and he cuts him in half, and his tackles invariably end up being a dominant tackle.
Exactly.
Whereas,
yeah.
The legs tackle, you end up low and he hits the ground hard. Look, all they need to do is bring in a simple rule that says a one-on-one legs tackle becomes a dominant tackle, and you can imagine what that would do to an attacking set. If the first guy was brought down and it became a dominant tackle, then it affects the whole set.
Yeah.
So what you'd be doing is players would be looking to offload it before getting tackled one-on-one, which would also add a little bit more variety rather than, I think these days we can be criticised that that's hit up, for a kick, or hit up for a play wide, but it can be a little predictable. So it would give the opportunity to the defensive line to take a bit more control.
Mate, I think there's some pretty good ideas in there. Just back on your career, I know in 94, I think it was, you moved across from your beloved Souths to enemy territory, started playing for the Roosters for the next 4 seasons. Can you quickly walk me through, I guess, how that club change came about?
Look, it was pretty controversial at the time, for people to remember. I was at the Rabbitohs and had agreed to a contract in 94 again, for the 94 season. In those days, contracts were just handshakes. You have an agreement, you shake your hand, and quite often you wouldn't even sign a contract until midway through the pre-season. I remember they'd come to you and say, look, you better sign a contract because you won't be registered this week. The first comp game this week.
Wow.
So that'd sort of remind you to sign a deal. What had happened is I'd had a handshake deal with Terry Parker, who was the general manager at the time, and then they completely changed their football office staff, and Alan Jones was given full control. And Alan, to his credit, he came in and said, Sean, look, I'm bringing Dean Schifferletti from Illawarra Steelers. I see him as a better player than you, and I'm not going to need you. And which was news to me, and was highly and hugely disappointing. And so I had to move on, and I went over to the Roosters and actually had to trial him. Though I'd played 55 first grade at the Rabbitohs at the time, I went over to the Roosters and trialled for a spot, and ended up getting one just in the squad, and it took me half a year till I played first grade again, and then, as luck would have it, I was made captain the following year when Phil Gould came. Mark Murray left and Phil Gould came in, I was made captain.
It's all fate, isn't it?
But it's funny, as you say, sliding doors. I remember we played the Rabbitohs, we played on Anzac Day. It was before the big Anzac Day clashes of today, and Roosters played the Rabbitohs at the SFS, and I think we beat them 66-0, which was bittersweet for me. I mean, my father and the whole family were still tragic Rabbitohs supporters.
Yep.
Here I was over the Roosters, and we beat the Rabbitohs 66-0, which was never forgotten.
And how did you play in that thrashing, Sean? Is it a particularly good moment for you as well, like in terms of your personal form?
Look, I was part of a pretty good team. It scored plenty of tries. I was happy that obviously you look to prove a point when you move on, and that was quite satisfying for me, I must say.
I'm interested as well, Sean. You mentioned about that Alan Jones chat. It just sounds so candid compared to what you hear these days. Someone coming in and literally just saying, "I think this other bloke's better than you." Was it really as honest as that? How did that conversation go?
Yeah, and that's why I couldn't fault Alan. I mean, rugby league's very subjective. What one person thinks might be completely different to another person's opinion is. He came in and said, "Look, and the Rabbitohs didn't have a great year in '93, and so there was agitation for change." And so Alan came in. He brought a new coach in, Ken Shine. He said, "We're going to change things up." There were players that have been there for a while, and it was also, funnily enough, it was the year the rule changed from 5 metres to 10 metres, and so he wasn't sure whether what that would do to the game in terms of just style of play, and he was of the belief that Ben Shiflett, he was a good player. He came to the Rabbitohs, and it was a bit of a change to the game, and there was a lot more room around dummy half straight away because the defensive line was twice as far back. And
did you enjoy that as a hooker, mate? The rule change from 5 to 10, did that give you a little bit more room to play around with?
Absolutely, it was fantastic. Although the big fellas had a bit more wind up.
Yeah, yin and yang.
That's right. There were some good components to get out of dummy half, but the boys were coming a bit faster now as well.
Yeah, right. What about the coaching, Sean, in your career? Who would you say is the best coach you ever played under?
Undoubtedly, it was Phil Gould. When I left the Rabbitohs, my first coach was George Piggins, who was very inspirational. He was a great old school coach. Moved on to Frank Curry, who was tactically very good, but didn't really. Well, I wasn't quite sure what to think of. I was only my first grade coach. Then when I moved to the Roosters, I had Mark Murray, the Queensland halfback, and tactically he was great. But a really good man manager. I just thought how the way he ran his training sessions, the way the club was set up, how competitive he had it amongst players was a real learning exercise. And then when Gus came in '95, he just it was like I just got to first grade. It was like the way he had everybody going in the one direction. He had everyone convinced that if you just did what he said, you'd win the game. There wasn't anybody that knew other players better than him. There's no one did more research than him, and he was just a masterful coach, and a pleasure to be around.
And what do you think it was about Gus, mate, that put him ahead of the pack? Was he innovative in a way, or was it more just he knew how to manage men?
Look, it was. I've never heard anyone speak better than Gus. He could tell you a story that would have players in tears. He was just so good at setting the scene and getting the most out of players. Quite often you go into a meeting after a game where coach he'd have a different opinion to you, and you go in there, and every time he'd come out going, "No, I'm wrong. He's right, and I'm wrong." Every single time.
Wow.
It was just his knowledge of the game, his knowledge of. He knew more about you than you did. Or if he didn't, he certainly convinced you that he did. That was probably his greatest weapon was his ability to convince you that if you did it this way, you'd win games, and if you didn't, you wouldn't. And it's amazing how powerful that can be, whether it be in sport or in business. When you can have your employees, when you can have your staff all going in the same direction, all in agreement of what needs to happen to win, you're halfway there.
Mate, I know I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to keep you too much longer, but who was the best player you think you played with over your career? Is there someone that stands out there?
Without a doubt, it would have been Brad Fittler.
Okay.
Which was strange because there probably wasn't a more casual guy than him either. He really knew how to have a good time back then. It was a different era, of course, and players then really it was great fun playing first grade. There was nowhere near the scrutiny that there is now. There wasn't ever the headlines that there are now. Not that we were better behaved, not at all. In fact, there was far worse behaviour back then than there ever is now, but there just wasn't an appetite for the media to report on it, and there was a lot of characters in the game. Freddie was one of them, but one thing, when it was game on, it was game on.
Yeah.
As soon as you crossed that line at training, no one trained harder, there was no one more serious, and no one more committed, but then as soon as you were away from training or away from the game, no one knew how to have a better time than Freddie either. It was just a great way to approach the game.
It sounds like it's a wonderful mix, isn't it? And you wonder, I guess, with someone like Brad Fittler, in terms of, inspiring his team, was he good at being able to, because he obviously went on to become, a captain for many years as well. Is he someone that was a good inspiration of men, or did people sort of more just follow his actions? Because, at times he wasn't sort of necessarily known for his inspirational speeches, was he? He was known for his...
No, you're spot on. Oh, look, he was very much a captain that led by example. He'd do things on the field that he didn't think were possible. He was also just so tough. He was able to play with injuries, chronic groin injuries and all sorts of problems that should have sidelined him. He just played, he was able to perform at a high level regardless of the circumstances around him, which was just so inspirational.
Sure. Look, I'll probably wrap it up pretty soon, mate, because I know you have to go. But I'd love to have another chat with you down the track if we could.
Sure,
mate, before you go, I'm a big fan of your pies, mate. My wife's not your biggest fan, though, because every time I go to Coles, I throw quite a few Garlo's pies in the trolley. Probably makes up 20% of our household bill, if you must know. But how's the pastry empire going?
Mate, it keeps us certainly very busy. I've got 9 direct family members working in the business. My mother, my father, my brother, my sister, 3 sons, wife. It's become just a wonderful thing to be able to run a family business and to grow it the way we have over 18 years now. It's just a pleasure, mate. And I'm still learning. I didn't know anything about business when we first started it. Not only have we never run a business before, I didn't even know anyone who would ever run a business. And so we've literally made it up as we've gone along. But it's been a steep learning curve, and there's still plenty to come.
Mate, well, I can tell you from one particular fan, they're a hell of a pie, mate. The thin pastry in particular is what gets me in. I think that makes a good pie. So,
Terrific, mate.
keep up the good work, mate, and hopefully we can have a chat down the track, because that was really good.
Yeah, will do. Thanks very much.
Thanks, buddy.
Soon.
Well, folks, that about does it for the show today. Please, if you have time, go on iTunes and rate or comment on the show. We're also available on Twitter at The Voluntary Tackle, also by Gmail, which is thevoluntarytackle@gmail.com. They're all the modes that you can get to us. Feel free to file in your abuse and weed in the odd compliment every now and again, just so we don't become suicidal. So until next time, just do what the West's Tigers would do, and recruit a team whose average age is higher than the cast of Cocoon 2. Good night.